Hello friends, for today's video I want to do a non-spoiler review for The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. This is a story upon first hearing about it that I was rather certain I was going to enjoy, as one, I've read other books by this author and quite liked them, but two, I enjoy cozy fantasy, as I know a lot of other individuals do as well. And I do think that while this pretty much represents and epitomizes a lot of what we like about cozy fantasy, I don't want this to be just restricted to that subgenre, because there's so much to this that I think even people that maybe find themselves tentative with cozy fantasy or often disappointed, they might find that they quite enjoy aspects of this one. So I'm going to jump into the synopsis first, and then I want to dive into this aspect after that. So the setup for this story is you follow this young woman named Keela and her sentient spider plant named Kaz, who is adorable and so cute. And it's basically like an animal companion, except for it's a plant. We have seen pretty quickly at the beginning of the story that Keela is somebody who absolutely adores books. She's a librarian. Books are basically her entire life. Kaz helps her in the library, but right at the start, the library is burning down as a result of some attacks that are occurring, and so Keela does what she can to rescue some of the very important works that are in the library, and then flees. And she doesn't really know where to go, so instinctively she just finds herself going to her childhood, very small hometown. When she arrives there, her intention is to just kind of wait it out. Maybe hopefully nobody will even notice that she's there, and then she can eventually return to the library once the dust settles. However, pretty quickly she's realizing that, one, there's a good chance that the dust isn't going to settle and that there's going to be unrest for a while, so she might have to make her new home a little bit more of a home, and she might need to make this more of a permanent stay. But on top of all of that, in her mind, she thought, I'm rescuing these important books, which happen to be magical books. They have magic within them, magic spells and knowledge about magic, I should say. In her mind, she was thinking, I'm saving these, so I will return them once I return to the library. However, it's technically illegal within their society for people who don't have the permission to have these books. It's illegal for them to take them from the library or even to look at. So she realizes, I could get in a lot of trouble if anybody realizes I have these books. She also doesn't really have any means of gaining information in this small area, as it's basically a secluded little island. It has a lot of small town feels. Everybody knows everybody, but they don't really get a whole lot of information from the outside. And so she is trying to hide her works. She wants to go home, but she also doesn't feel like she can, and so she's trying to figure out, how am I going to be self-sufficient? How am I going to survive? And pretty quickly it's clear to her that being self-sufficient isn't exactly her forte, and she might need to rely on her neighbors a little bit more than she expects, or the other people within this small island. From there, you start to see a lot of community building, which I think is starting to become quite a staple within cozy fantasy. I'm thinking of things like You Can't Spell Treason Without Tea or Travis Baldry's works. I think getting to know other people and trying to establish yourself and to have your roots settled in a certain area with the help of others is something that I absolutely love in these stories, and something that I think made this a little bit different within the Spellshop than in some of the other works I just mentioned is that Keela finds herself to be incredibly antisocial, and so much so that she stumbles through how to have a conversation. She often doesn't know how to talk to other people, and because of the small town vibes, everybody knows everybody, and everybody kind of accidentally ends up in your business. Everybody kind of wants to know more than she feels Keela feels she can reveal about herself and why she's even here. The only thing she's really got as a security blanket for herself is that she technically grew up on this island, so she kind of falls back on that a lot, but every time she kind of just tries to go back to her little corner of this island, there's always somebody who's being neighborly, somebody who's checking up on her, and she finds herself both irritated and appreciative, which I think is very relatable. I think that it's so lovely when people are that caring, but at the same time, I think it's very fair to say that some people, they're just a little more introverted. They don't always feel like they know how to navigate social situations. And with Keela herself, I think it's very fitting to her her situation. She was a librarian. She pretty much just talked to her plant, Kaz, and that was it. She always liked knowing there was other librarians around. She always liked that she knew that there were people in her periphery, you could say, but she didn't really feel the need to talk to other people, and other people didn't really feel the need to talk to her. And if they did, it was always around books. There was this kind of blueprint for what the topic of conversation was going to entail, so she felt like she had an idea of how to navigate those conversations, but she feels like she has no idea what she's doing when it comes to just talking to people out in the wild. The wild just being this nice little community of people. So I really appreciated getting to see how her antisocial tendencies were something that actually affected her. It was more than just a personality quirk. It was something that felt very real, and I think the way that it was depicted in the story was something a lot of people can relate to, especially because there are times where she finds herself wanting to go tell somebody something or wanting to share something with someone, but then also being like, but oh my gosh, then I have to talk to them. Besides the sense of community that we find often in cozy fantasy, I think something else that is fairly criticized about this subgenre is sometimes low stakes is sort of a cover for lack of depth. And I do think that there have been instances where it can just feel light and fluffy, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having the occasional story that is primarily just light and fluffy, but sometimes we want to read something that has a lot of depth. It's just not necessarily epic in proportions, and I do think that the Spellshop established that in a number of ways. One, I think that the grief that our character is feeling over some things that she has clearly suppressed is very well depicted in this. I don't want to say too much about that because I think her sort of emotional journey, you could say, throughout the story in regards to this and the way being back home sort of brings about all of these emotions. I think that is done in a way that I don't want to ruin for anybody, so I won't give too many details about that. But for anybody that has experienced grief, it does sneak up on you in the strangest of ways, and it is just sort of this thing that is always there. It doesn't just disappear. So I think the way that was done was great, but it's not just the personal depth that you get. You also, I think, have some themes that maybe you can read this story and just not even worry about trying to find these other meanings within it, but something that this book does is shows the way in which sometimes these smaller communities can be left behind and forgotten. In their world, in the past, a lot more people had access to magic and knowledge. And then at some point there was a shift. The government in this world decided that there should only be specific individuals who have access to this magical knowledge and thus access to magic itself. And the idea was that these people who are professionals would be the ones to go to places and meet the needs of the people. And while in theory this isn't entirely an awful idea, what ends up happening is that there are these small communities that get forgotten, and thus it results in these professionals never actually going where they need to go. Not only that, but the people who used to mind certain parts of the environment no longer can, and so you're now seeing pretty much catastrophes. You're seeing these natural disasters that are completely ruining people's lives. It's ruining the nature around them as well, animals, and in this world there happens to be mythical creatures and plant life. The home that Keela returned to is not the one that she remembers from her childhood. She's seeing the ways in which being forgotten and left behind is affecting everyone, and she wants to do something to help. She specifically finds, well, I have some texts right here hidden with me that maybe have some of the answers. Perhaps I can try to help this community. What's the harm if nobody's paying attention to them anyway? And this is something that you find to be admirable, but at the same time, it's dangerous because it is illegal. But where I'm going with all this and with the idea of these themes, I don't think it's that hard to look into some of the places in the world, it happens everywhere, where there are individuals who the environment and their entire way of life is ruined because of the decisions of not even necessarily a specific person, but it's like this entity. If it were a sci-fi book, it would be this corrupt corporation type of thing. And we've seen that played out in various other works. Something like the Murderbot Diaries, I think, showcases that really well. And I think that was the case here, too. You see the ways in which this community deserves better, but because they're not getting it, it also furthers the reason why they're always looking out for each other, which I think is a great world building detail. So I just think that while yes, sometimes cozy fantasy, it can just be airy and fun and light. This one had those feelings. It made you feel good. It made you happy. It was cute at times. While it has all of that, it also has some pretty emotional moments, both for the community at large and for Keela as a main character. And then getting to more world building elements, because that's another thing. I think sometimes cozy fantasy, the world building's really, really minimal. For something like The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, if you've read that, it's basically our own world, except for secretly there are some witches that exist. There's not a whole lot else that needs to be established there. But in this one, Sarah Beth Durst, because she's creative, I guess, decided to take the time to put in so much into this world where it just feels vibrant and beautiful, and you find yourself being like, oh, I guess that person has antlers. There's forest spirits, and there are mythical beings in the water, and the way that spells affect the plant life, and the way it's all kind of connected, and you're like, oh, it's like such a great fantasy world. I feel like that's what so many of us want from those kind of like light fairy tale like stories where you just want to get lost in the vibrancy of it all and the vividness of it all. You just kind of want to sink your teeth into something that feels so alive and different. And I think she established that really well, and there's a lot of fine details throughout the story. I know I've been talking a lot about the ways in which this is representative of a lot of what we like in cozy fantasy, but I do want to touch on really quick another somewhat genre-specific thing, which is that I have seen this marketed as fantasy romance or romantasy, and I'm not saying you can't call it that, because there is a romantic subplot in the story. But I think a lot of the themes and a lot of what transpires in this is also possible without the love story that was present in this. And I will say the love story is very cute and it's very wholesome. If you are somebody that's looking for spice, this does not have it. So it really kind of stays in the cozy cute area. But where I was going with this is just to say that the romance is not the driving factor of the story. And I think it's really difficult at this point in time because fantasy romance is such a newer subgenre, or just a newer genre depending on how you look at it, that it's hard to even determine what is considered fantasy and what's considered fantasy romance or romantasy, however you categorize it. And I think one thing that I have pinned down is the romance one of the driving factors of the plot? In this story, I would say no. It is a subplot. It is important in the story, but it's not any more important than her learning how to find her own footing and have this new life for herself. It's not necessarily more significant than her developing friendships with some of the other people on this island, or even her becoming a little bit more one with nature. And she also sells jam. That's a big part of how she makes a living, and the ways in which that connects her to her childhood. There's all these important factors that play a role in the overall arc of this character, and the romance is fitted into that. Overall, so much of this book I just thought was absolutely precious, while still having, like I said before, those really wonderful deeper themes that I think so many of us can very easily see related to our own world and a lot of the crises that occur in our own world. So if you are interested in the Spellshop, I definitely think it's worth it. Also, if you're a mood reader, this is like the perfect thing to pick up in the fall season or even springtime, because it has that kind of cottage feel to it. It was delightful. It was very sweet. It was very wholesome, and I absolutely adored it. But if you've read the Spellshop, feel free to say your thoughts on it. Let me know. Did you love Kaz also? I thought he was so cute, and he was always kind of timid and sweet, and I just thought he was great. But anyway, if you read it, let me know your thoughts. If you're interested in reading it, let me know. And if you're interested in hearing more about Sarah Beth Durst's other works, I'll have a video I've done discussing those in the description bar down below, as well as a link to this book if you're interested in it. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.